to the QUT Law Society's Careers Without Clerkships event. Before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders past and present. My name is Kat Durante and I'll be your MC this evening. I'm currently the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Officer in the QUT Law Society this year, and I work within the education portfolio. I'm particularly excited for this event this evening as we're going to hear from a number of our panellists who come from a variety of disciplines. And I guess the aim of tonight is to provide you all with an opportunity to both hear from experienced members of the profession, but most importantly ask questions which are relevant for you to ensure you're on track to achieve your professional goals. So without further ado, I would like to briefly introduce our panel. So on your right is Drew Cutler. We've got Chris Hargraves, Mark Thomas, who might be a familiar face to many of you here tonight. We've got Vijay Edwards and also Brent Thomas. Brent Stowers. Oh, I apologise.
It's not a takeover by the Thomas.
So with that being said, I will just pass the mic along the panel and they'll briefly introduce themselves, talk about where they're working at the moment, how they got there.
Good evening everyone, my name is Drew. I currently work for the Australian Services Union in their industrial team. And how I ended up there, if you know me, it's fairly unions are a fairly political environment. So my experience coming from government throughout my time at university, I was able to network enough to find myself a position within the industrial team. I'm currently completing my PLT at College of Law. I'm able to collect my hours within my job, and I have significant experience. I've gained significant experience, over the last 6 months within various industrial relations commissions like the Fair Work Commission and the QIRC. Thank you, Drew.
My name's Chris. I like introducing myself about as much as everyone else here does and always wonder what I should say. My day today involved collecting a fridge, doing some homeschooling with my children, doing some digital marketing, buying sushi, and then coming here on a bus after arranging some babysitting. I did 0% lawyering today. My current general setup is I am a casual lawyer, usually about 10 to 15 hours a week. I've been in litigation and insolvency for about 15 years before that. I very much enjoyed the practice of law, but ultimately decided to take a slightly different spin. Some of you may have occasionally read some of the drivel that I post online at Tips for Lawyers, or seen some of my annoying videos. If we're in any way connected on LinkedIn, then I will have poked up probably pretty regularly in your news feeds. So that's me.
Hi, can everyone hear? My name's Mark Thomas. Many of you might know me as a shadowy figure who lurks in the back of professional ethics and administrative law, because I unit coordinate both of those. I'm a senior lecturer in the law school, but I'm also a practicing barrister. So I live in this world where I sort of jump between two different universes. Right at the moment, I've been briefed in a aiding suicide trial, which is coming up in a couple of months, following another aiding suicide trial at the end of last year. How I got here would take an evening, because in practice, I'm on, depending on how you count it, my fourth or possibly fourth and a half career, because I started out before all of you were born, to be honest, working in theatre in the 1970s at the end of my first degree, which was in literature. So I have this zigzag path through the universe in terms of careers, which is about as non-traditional as I think you could probably imagine. Pass on?
Sure. Good evening, everyone. My name's Vijay Edwards. I'm a partner at Colin Biggers and Paisley. I work in the insurance team. How I got here is not that interesting, but a bit fun. A good mate of mine was working in a bottle shop at a pub in town. There was a person that kept coming in and visiting him every week. She was kind of a bit sweet on him, so I got him a job at a law firm. There was a job going at the same time. He got me a job at a law firm. 10 years later, I left that law firm, moved to another law firm in Sydney, and then made my way back to Brisbane. So I think the moral of the story is relationships help your career. So that's probably me in a nutshell.
Well, I've also been to a few bottle shops along the way. So my name is Brent Stowers. Most recently, I was Senior Legal Counsel at Thiess. About 3 weeks ago, I became General Manager of Innovation and Technology at Thiess. So there are sort of careers beyond law as well. My law journey started at this university in 1992 as a 20-year-old police officer in Queensland doing justice studies. Over the next sort of, 26 years ago, I guess, finished justice studies, did a business degree, worked in the mines, worked at Mount Isa for a number of years, started with Thiess about 13 years ago. With Thiess, I've worked sort of in the Bowen Basin, worked in India for a year, did a fair bit of travel and knocked out a law degree during that time. So was admitted about 6 years ago, went straight into the Thiess legal team and left 3 weeks ago. So, but we'll probably end up back there at some time. So it's been quite a zigzag journey, like some of the others.
Excellent. Oh, that's a bit loud. I'm going to open up the floor with the first question. And so for the panel, what would your best advice be for a current law student?
I'll get the microphone, so I might start. Enjoy it. Enjoy student drink prices. That's something that I really miss. It's one of those things where you sort of look back and you go, it was actually a really good time of life to be at uni. So you got to make the most of that. But in terms of your career, when you see things that you want to do, or what I found really works for me is when I see something that I want to do, I tell as many people about it as possible. And you will always find someone who wants to help you on the way. So be vocal about what you want to do. I don't think anything is standard or traditional anymore. There are, sort of many different paths you can take into law, out of law, and that sort of thing. But, express it and people will want to help you.
For mine, I think the best tip is your career is going to be all about relationships. I think I was told a statistic the other day, which was for a successful career, there'll be 3 important people in your life that will help you succeed. So the way I look at it is right now, it's all about getting to know as many people as you can and maintaining those relationships as you get older, because the people that you're friends with now and build relationships now will ultimately be the people that are giving out work or giving work to in the future. So if you can build some strong bonds now, and make friends with the right people, it can be very fruitful.
If I had to sum it up in one sentence, it would be something along the lines of keep an eye peeled for the main chance. If you look back across my history with all of those right angle turns that have taken through my career, if you'd asked me before those turns occurred, a couple of years before those turns occurred, or if you told me what I would be doing 5 years later, I would have laughed in your face because they were all things which I simply did not anticipate and I was simply not heading towards. I had no trajectories in those directions. What I did have is the ability or something to recognize where there was an interesting turn coming up and to take it and run with it. And it's as a result of making choices about that, when happy accidents, and to be perfectly honest, a lot of them have been nothing more than happy accidents, when they turn up, recognize them for what they are and grab them.
Vijay kind of took mine, and then Mark touched on what I was otherwise going to mention. So I'm now just sort of buying time while my brain sort of tries to catch up with something else. I guess what I would say is that law is both a very challenging and a very rewarding career. And the people I have seen who ultimately end up disillusioned or dissatisfied or become one of the statistics that I'm sure you've all been told about or come across in some way about dissatisfaction in their legal careers are the people who get caught up in a rut of some kind that is not the path they have chosen or would have ever chosen, and they decline to take the kinds of opportunities that Mark talked about because they feel like there's only one set direction for success in a legal career. And while that may have been true one day, I don't think that's necessarily true these days. There are certainly large chunks of the profession who look very similar to each other in terms of what they do each day or their work style. But the opportunities are there for those who are alive to them. And so I just encourage you to both be a bit forward thinking in terms of actually deciding for yourself what you want to do. That doesn't mean you'll be able to do it all immediately, but also be aware of what opportunities present themselves throughout your career.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to say just network, like you haven't. Oh, right. I just said it in a different way. Well, here's one for you that I haven't said. Find yourself a mentor and cling on to them and don't let go. Because if you can find yourself a good mentor within the profession, you'll find yourself presented with opportunities that you, as everyone else has touched on, that you may not think, was the ideal career pathway as a law student. When you're at university, everyone's talking about clerkships. When I was at university, I was working full time, and not once did a clerkship cross my mind. I never applied for a clerkship. I never applied to work in a firm. I simply networked and found myself within the profession or thereabouts. And now I have gained leaps and bounds of experience within the first 6 months of working within the area. So yeah, network, find yourself a mentor, and don't let go.
Excellent. I think that was all really wonderful advice. I'm going to open the floor now to questions from the audience. So we have a runner. We have Lauren at the back. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll get this started.
Thanks, Lauren. Guys, a lot of you have spoken about networking, finding a mentor, knowing different people in the industry. How can we find those opportunities now? Like, where do we go looking to actually have those networking opportunities?
Walk down George Street. Who's participating in the QUT mentoring program that I know Lee diligently organises many years? So there's an option, because and I know for a fact, because it was mentioned not very long ago, that it is underutilised. Many professionals offer their time to that program, and many of them are not ultimately taken up as mentors because of the underwhelming participation in the program. So that's one option. I won't speak for too long if other people have other ideas, but you probably all know I'm a fan of LinkedIn, because I've mentioned it twice in the space of 10 minutes. LinkedIn is a very easy opportunity for getting to know people in an inoffensive and largely collegiate way, simply by turning up and reading stuff and connecting with people and commenting. I mean, that's really all networking is. You determine who the people are that you would like to get to know better. You find out the kinds of things that they do and the kind of places they hang out, whether it's online or offline, and you go and hang out with them and get to know them. That's what networking is in a nutshell. That's what I do.
I guess finding a mentor and networking came about in a rather, or not a very normal way. I was heavily involved in politics, still am, throughout my teenage years. And I found myself working in the big building just over there. And if you can find a foot within government, and state government in particular, then there are a number of professionals working in that space that have contacts right across the state and right across Australia. So that's where I found my mentors, and that's how I networked. I will admit that I am not an avid user of LinkedIn, but I probably should be. Yeah, so that's how I found my networks within state government. So
I'm not only am I not a fan of LinkedIn, I wouldn't even know how to get onto it. I have certain problems with social media as a general proposition, and I really don't play in that particular sandpit. I'd much rather shake hands and sit down and have a drink with someone as a networking exercise. The professional associations can be, and for me have been, quite useful. The bar is, of course, quite different because you're dealing with a much smaller number of people. There's about 10,000 solicitors admitted in Queensland at the moment. There's, I think, less than 1,000 barristers. And so it's a smaller pool to dip into and to make connections. But I've also found what's really been quite useful is the people I was at university with. They've gone off into a multiplicity of career paths. To try and keep contact with some of those spreads where your footprint is in the world of networking.
Just to touch upon a point that Mark raised there, industry associations is probably my biggest tip. There's various ones like the Australian Corporate Council group, there's property-specific industry groups, there's insurance-specific industry groups, and a whole gamut of others. And the best thing about those is you get to turn up and have a weird, awkward conversation with somebody that you've never met before. You'll do that probably 10 or 15 times throughout the night, and the next time you go, you'll have another weird and awkward conversation. But after you go a few more times, like, the weirdness and the awkwardness starts to dissipate, and eventually you'll start to enjoy going there. And by that time, you would have made a whole bunch of great contacts throughout the industry. So embrace the weirdness, because you're going to experience plenty of.
Yeah, look, for me, it's probably, getting involved in your community and looking for different ways that you can, for example, volunteer. So I work at, I volunteer at Caxton Legal Centre. I've met students there that I've been able to give sort of tips to, or when we're looking for clerks at Thiess, pass on those sort of advertisements and things like that. But even getting involved in, organisations, whether it's sporting or whether it's community organisations or things like that, just outside of the traditional law community, you'll meet people who can help you out with stuff. And like I said earlier on, the more people you talk to and tell about what you want to do, you never know who you're going to run into and who you're going to meet. And those kind of people are looking for, when they do look for students, they're looking for people who are engaged and enthusiastic and want to do stuff and are proactive and are trying to do things themselves, as opposed to waiting for opportunities to come to them. Yeah, that was weird. I embrace that weirdness.
And awkward.
I mean, all of these ideas, I think, are workable and good. And I'll do this. Okay. All of these ideas are good. I think the thing that's probably stopping you from networking is, A, you don't really want to because it's awkward and weird. And I for myself, I left my relationship building, which is a more approachable word than networking to me, or marketing, much longer than I ought to have, to be frank, in my career. It was always something I was kind of peripherally aware of a need to do, but law is a very human practice. It is always fundamentally about people, even if you end up in what might seem like a more intellectual practice or a corporate practice of some kind. It's always, at the end of the day, about people in one form or another. So I think whatever you pick, whether it's any of these things or one of 6,000 variations on the theme, the best advice is to say, just go and do something. Do something. Don't just sit around trying to say, gee, I wish I could network more. Pick something, if it's a sport or a volunteering or whatever. And I know a lot of people in this room probably volunteer already. And so you are building your networks in that way. And that's over time. It's not an immediate proposition. It's a sort of medium to long-term proposition of what the benefits might be, but it could ultimately help you. I mean, we're all here to talk about both careers, but also jobs. It can help you in jobs as well, in the short term and the medium term.
Just to pick up on that point, great advice going out there and doing as much as you can, because I know that in our particular graduate program at CBP, we don't look at GPAs, we look at how well-rounded the particular candidates are. Things we're looking for is people who have travelled, people who have worked in customer-focused jobs, people who have joined different committees, people who have gone out in the community and done different things. To us, that's a much more well-rounded candidate that you're going to fit within your firm, because a big part about looking for a candidate is the right cultural fit. We know that law students are all very smart people. They're all coming to us with great CVs, but the issue for us is how we differentiate all these great people on paper. And for us, that's the cultural fit, and making sure that when they turn up at work, people that are working with them feel comfortable around them. And the way that we do that is by sort of looking at their community involvement and their involvement outside of the law, to see what type of person we think they are. So wholly endorse that point. Do as much as you can, because not only does it help your job prospects at a place like ours, but also it builds those relationships and contacts.
Great advice. Does anyone else have another question at the back or in the middle?
My question is, if you could go back and start your legal career all over again, what would you do differently?
Absolutely nothing. It was only 4 years ago. So I'm not sure if I've had time to reflect on that, but I'm very happy with where I have ended up. I was just sort of thinking before when Vijay mentioned the graduate program. I think it's probably important to note if you're on Seek or or any other sort of job hunting website for looking for graduate positions, you probably actually scroll straight past jobs like mine without even realizing. It's not actually a requirement to be a lawyer or a graduate lawyer to work within an industrial relations team of a union or an advisory body. But you're still able to present in front of the industrial relations commissions, which are pretty much exactly set out like a court if you've ever been into them. You can get your PLT hours there. You can network. I interact with a lot of employment lawyers throughout my time at work. So what was the question again? Yeah, okay. What do you regret? Yeah, what do I regret? I regret nothing. I didn't apply for any clerkships, as I said before, and I don't regret that. I feel as though by taking the road less travelled, you're going to stand out more to the people that are looking for those special people which they can then grow and develop into something that's much more special than a graduate coming into a top tier firm and being churned and burned for a couple of years before you even get to enter a courtroom.
This is going to sound like a no regrets panel if we all say this, but I think, like everyone, I made a series of decisions that were the best decisions I could make, presented with the information I had available to me. If I was advising myself 15 years ago, would I suggest doing a few things differently? Maybe. Would I actually do them? Maybe not, because we all have a tendency just to we take in vast amounts of advice, and we generally action very, very little of it. If you think about it, who's read the 12 successful morning routines of the world's richest people or something, and if you did all of those things, by the time you've had your drop of lemon in your spring water followed by the activated almond meal pancakes, your day's over because you've spent all your time going through your morning routine. So I guess my point is, I wouldn't like to suggest that any one thing would massively change my career, because I think the best thing you can do is, yes, seek input from people, make good decisions, accept that those are the best decisions you can make, and then carry on. I have already sort of hinted at one already, which is probably I would have spent more time on relationship building earlier in my career than what I did, because I think that the people who have focused more on relationships, even though it would have been a bit outside my comfort zone as a fairly introverted, tending individual, that would have been one thing I would have changed career-wise. But other than that, I think, you know, that's not to say my life has been perfect. I've done some monumentally dumb stuff, but by and large, I still made the best decisions I could most of the time.
And yet another, non, je ne regrette rien. I wouldn't change any of the decisions which I made, starting from when I first decided to study law at a very advanced stage in 1993, possibly before some of you were born. Not, I think, because I think I made right decisions or good decisions, but simply by looking at the end product. And I've ended up somewhere where I'm really quite happy to be. Now, I don't really think I can take too much credit for that, other than the fact that as the things have floated into my eye line, I've taken them up. And I've been very lucky, I have to admit, in a lot of those things that have happened. But as to different advice or any different decisions I might have made in the 1990s, or even at the end of my degree or after that, no, I'm quite happy with them. But I said they weren't necessarily the product of a carefully worked out plan, or in fact, they were the exact opposite of a very carefully worked out plan. They were a more or less haphazard. This is really bad advice to give people. Yeah, I'm a living embodiment of chaos theory and career planning. But I see, I came at it, I was 45 when I was admitted to the bar. I had, a lot of things that all of you are now aspiring to have. So I had a house, I owned a house outright, I owned a car. So the pressures on me to perform or to go down a particular path and create this magic carpet ride through the legal universe, they weren't there. I had a certain amount of freedom to be able to indulge in strange practices. I'll leave it at that.
I do have a regret, which was very early on in my career. A lot of my colleagues and friends were moving to London, and I thought that was going to set their careers back a long way by not sticking with one firm, staying in the one spot, getting to senior associate as quickly as possible, with the intention of getting to partner as quickly as possible. I regret not going overseas. Had I gone overseas, I probably wouldn't have met my wife, and I probably wouldn't be in this seat doing this job. But having said that, I gave up an opportunity. I regretted it for a long time. Largely because I had more money thrown at me and I had a promotion thrown at me. So if I can give you one piece of advice, it's follow your gut rather than listening to people who are going to throw things at you, because every time you try to leave a job, an employer is going to throw various things at you to try and keep you in the job. But really follow your instincts and follow your gut, because your gut's probably telling you the right thing and your employer's not. So that would be my regret that I wish I could change.
I have plenty of regrets, quite different to you guys. No, I'm just kidding. Look, I don't think you can have regrets, and you can't think about the things you want to change because quite simply you can't do it. And if those things didn't happen, then you wouldn't be in the position that you are now. So something that Vijay and I were talking about before we started is for a lot of you in this room, you are actually never going to be freer than you are right now. You're probably never going to have more money than you have right now. By the time you start having partners and kids and houses and mortgages and all of that kind of thing. I wish that I had taken more advantage of opportunities earlier on. I wish I'd travelled more earlier. And I wish that I'd sort of taken myself out of my comfort zone a lot earlier. Because by the time I started doing that stuff, for example, moving with a young family to Mount Isa, which was a bit scary at the time to go work in the mines. And I actually had the best sort of 3 or 4 years of my life and met some fantastic people. And it really set me up for the next sort of stage of my career. When I was offered a role in India, I'd sort of done the Mount Isa thing and I'd done other things. And I was used to, by that time, making decisions that were going to be uncomfortable. And it was very uncomfortable. Moved to Calcutta with my partner at the time. And, after 2 weeks there of, constant sickness and, it's a very high sort of pressure environment to live in, and work wasn't going well, et cetera, et cetera. And you start thinking, have I made the right call? And you look back at it now and go, actually, that was fantastic. Some of the experiences we had there were great. right out of the comfort zone, but they set you up for the next thing. So, no, if I had any regrets at all, is not sort of jumping into those things earlier on and recognizing that the difficult stuff or the stuff that's a bit scary, that's actually the good stuff. So you need to take advantage of that. And while you're young, for Christ's sake, travel, get out there.
And just on that, some of the most impressive CVs that you see as an employer are the people who have worked in various roles around the world. They might have had an interesting job in the States or in the UK or somewhere in Africa. That's the type of thing you're looking for an employer, because you can say that somebody's willing to throw themselves in the deep end, and that's the type of employee you want. Yeah, it's a good thing.
Fantastic. Well, I know that's very comforting for me. I know about a lot of you guys as well as current law students. I guess you kind of feel like you're floundering in the chaos, but perhaps there's a bit of beauty in that in the long run. So do we have another question? We do.
Hi. So based on the advice that I've sort of heard throughout the night, it's definitely like, you know, taking stuff up as it comes and not sort of fitting within a specific mold or running the one lane in the track. For law students who don't really want to pursue a career in the more traditional pathway of law, would you say that it's more beneficial to sort of not apply yourself in terms of like opportunities in the more traditional pathways, or and sort of just only apply for like the more the more alternative pathways, or would you say to try both? And on that note, as well as working in government, what for those who have worked in government, what are some of your tips for sort of getting your foot in the door? Because from what I see, getting a job in the government, you need to already have some sort of qualification and not be a student at the time. Yeah, that's it.
Start with you, Drew, if you want to answer that part.
So the first part of your question, I'm not sure if I can answer that truthfully, because it never actually crossed my mind at all. Like literally never did I once go, geez, I think I should apply for a clerkship. That'll set me up for my law degree. So I don't think I can answer that overly truthfully, to be truthful. I would definitely recommend the pathway that I have taken. You know, within 2 months of being in my workplace, I was put in front of a commissioner at the QIRC by myself. So it was quite daunting. But professionally, I've grown so much from that. To answer the second part of your question, in terms of getting into government, if you know politicians, that's a great start. But in terms of getting into the bureaucracy levels, you really need to be submitting your resume for absolutely every job. And you mentioned that some of them already require qualifications. I think it would be important to note that that you shouldn't count yourself out for the lower level administrative jobs within government, because once you're in there, it's very easy to jump and it's very easy to move sideways. And if you can, you know, create those contacts and network, and it's quite easy when you're in one building. If you can create those contacts and network, then when those positions do become available, when you have finished your degree, then it is quite easy to move into those more senior roles. I know TMR are often looking for legal advisors and policy officers. That's what I was doing before I moved to the ASU. I was working in policy within a ministerial capacity. But I would definitely just don't count yourself out for those lower level roles, because as I've said, once you're in, it's very easy to move up.
I think I agree definitely with the government part. Everywhere is generally easy to move around once you're there, rather than getting there in the first place. But I guess, so fundamentally your question is, should I go for the thing I really want right now, which seems to be well, I gather it's government from the second part of your question, And should I pursue that to the detriment or to the absolute absence of pursuing anything else? Like, should I just absolutely streamline myself to that? And it's either, you know, come hell or high water, that's what I'm doing. And if I'm unemployed for 7 years beforehand, then so be it. And I guess we can broaden that out too, to say different practice areas or different firms or different types of working. You know, some people might want to work while visiting the Himalayas from their, you know, remote areas, or they might want to get some sort of new law job in a disparate law practice of some kind that I know people of various different categories are interested in. You might have a deep, passionate desire to work in insurance with Vijay, but there might not be insurance positions going at the time. And so the question is, should you take a conveyancing role just so you can actually eat and pay your rent in the meantime, or should you really just go for the thing you know you want? That's a really hard, bigger picture sort of life challenging question. I think my personal answer is going to be to ask more questions, because that's easier than giving an answer, which is, firstly, it's very hard to discount doing something that you've never done. Like you don't really know for sure what you're going to enjoy working as, or how you're enjoy working, or how you're going to thrive as a, you know, actually done it. There are some people who genuinely believe they want to get into property because they just loved learning the entire history of the Torrens system, and then they realize that the reality of practice doesn't involve any of that garbage at all. So sorry for anyone who really enjoyed property. And so they might find that they actually don't enjoy that at all, despite the fact that they were intellectually you know, vibrant during the study of it. They don't enjoy the practice of it, and so they might find they enjoy something else, and so they move around. And that is the reality of most life decisions, which is, again, you are going to make the best decision you can. I think if that's what you want to do, you should pursue it wholeheartedly. But if you are continually bashing your head against a brick wall in that pursuit, you might need to find a more circuitous route to get there. But bear in mind, that's just not just sending job applications in necessarily. That's going to involve all the other things we've spoken about already, and no doubt will come up even more, which is, if you want to pursue government, then or whatever else it might be, then your goal is to find people in there, to connect with them, to go to events, to join industry things, to participate with those people who are in some way going to be connected to that thing that you want to do, whether it's volunteering or at first a low-level job. I mean, if you are living with your parents, for example, and you don't have, depending how much board they charge you, necessarily the same financial pressures that some other people do, then you might have some more margin to leave yourself open to those opportunities that you really want, while letting other opportunities sail by. But everyone's in a different situation. Some people might desperately need any job that gets offered to them, and so you'll take it because that's better than not having a job.
I'm looking around the room trying to gauge how old most of you actually are, and it doesn't really matter from where I'm standing. You're all very, very young. But there are people talking about having an idea of where they want to go. And I guess I would just caution people that where you think you want to go now, and where you might want to be in 5 years' time, and where you might think you would want to be 5 years down the track again, may well change quite dramatically as you learn more about what it actually means to be a lawyer and what lawyers do on a day-to-day basis. My senior master at the bar told me that I should never, ever, in my last year of my degree, said never, ever get a job as a solicitor. You will hate it and you will leave the law forever. And he would have been dead right on that. I just wouldn't have fitted into that kind of culture. But if you narrow your focus too much, what you're doing is actually taking out the possibilities, which are 5 years down the road or whatever. And just to illustrate that, in 1998, in my last semester of my degree, I decided I only had 2 subjects to do, and I thought I'd given up work, and I thought maybe I should do something useful with my life for once. And I sent off an application to Caxton Legal Centre. I didn't know anything about Caxton Legal Centre. I didn't know anything about the community legal sector at all. I eventually discovered that Caxton at the time had 7 full-time staff, all of whom were female. And I had a vague suspicion that my application would have been thrown in the bin. It wasn't. It was rescued because the director looked on the second page and noticed at the bottom of the second page that I had a line that said I'd worked in theatre. And as it happened, the senior solicitor at the time was a NIDA graduate and had worked in theatre throughout her legal career. And the director just gave it to Ros and said, maybe this guy might be interesting. And I ended up volunteering in that last semester. Oddly enough, I did work for 8 weeks in a locum position as a solicitor. I wasn't admitted when I did that work, but we won't go into that. It was all lawful and signed off by a solicitor. But again, without my actually engineering it, I ended up on the management committee, and eventually I've been the president of Caxton for the last 12 years. And that has actually been amongst the most satisfying time that I've spent as a lawyer. Now, I don't need to be a lawyer to be that position, but it is traditionally inhabited by lawyers. And these are those things which emerge without your planning. Where you plan to go, you almost certainly won't end up. That is the fortune of a very small number of people. They have a very clear vision of where they want to go. They have the talent, the skills, and a certain amount of luck, and they get there. And it doesn't change. That's right, and it doesn't change 4.5 or 67 times through their life. I've met people like that. I'm not quite certain how happy they are, but for most of the universe, that's not how it works.
I'm probably not the best person to speak to about not working in the legal industry because that's all I've ever done. But what I can say is probably just don't close your eyes to an opportunity. I had a pretty defined view on where I wanted to go. When I was coming to the end of my law degree, I thought I wanted to be the best mergers and acquisition lawyer that graced the earth's face. Now looking at the hours they work and the marketing that they have to do, I'm thank God every day that I don't do what they do. If you want to work weeks on end without sleep or minimal sleep and then have no work at all for the next 3 months, go down that path. But insurance law, it's a very consistent area of law, and I wouldn't have done it if I didn't accept the opportunity that was just thrown up my way. One of the things that a lot of good graduate programs do is they recognise that you guys might not necessarily know or might not have the right idea about where you want to be a couple of years into your legal career. So what we'll do is we'll give you an opportunity to start, but rather than allowing you to work in an area that you want to work in, or you just accepting a job in any particular area, I know that our firm puts you across 3 different rotations. There's a litigious one, which is the nuts and bolts of court. That you've got a transactional one, which is a lot of property and banking, stuff like that. And there's also a third area, which could be a kind of a mixture of the both. So we recognise that you guys might not be completely across where you want to be. So we try to open your eyes to different areas. Then after that period of time, you might see really where you want to go. So all I say is don't close your eyes to an opportunity, because you never know what's out there and you never know what you really might like.
Yeah, look, obviously I support everything that's been said so far. I think some very clear advice is, number one, apply for everything, because then when you do get offered things, you've got options, right? So don't try and sort of cut out options before you put applications in. Secondly, if there is a particular industry or area that you want to work in, such as government, do everything you can to get that foot in the door to start with. So I was in Canada recently doing a transaction, and the lawyer that was on the other side said he always wanted to be a lawyer in the mining industry. He couldn't get a start anywhere, so he did a traineeship as a truck operator, and went and worked in the oil sands in Canada, driving trucks for a mining company, and he did that for about 2 years before he could talk himself into a job in the office, essentially as a mail boy, and then did a good job with the mail, and spoke to people and told them about his law degree, and eventually talked his way into the legal team, to sort of get to the place he wanted to be. In terms of, having that vision ahead of you, 3 years ago, I would have said to you, my dream job would be, senior legal counsel or general counsel of Thiess, where I was, because I really enjoy the work. Fantastic industry, great people, and it still is a good place. In the last probably 6 months, I've been sort of going down an innovation journey, which our business is going down, and starting to look at some very cool things around, data analysis and wearable technology, and autonomy is a big one for us, and getting excited about that. And then to get the offer that I've got in front of me now to go and do something different in innovation and technology. 6 months ago, I didn't realise that's where I wanted to be. Now I'm doing that. I'm like, where has this been all my life? This is what I want to do. And I'm 45. I was 39 when I was admitted as a lawyer. So things change, your life changes, and there are things out there now which you don't know. What's the George Bush thing? You don't know what you don't know. So don't get too fixated on something. But if you are thinking about something now, do everything you can to get in there at any level. Talk to people about it, push yourself along. But then if you get there, don't think, right, I've achieved this, so I don't have to go anywhere else now and become unhappy about it. Things will change.
Great advice. Do we have any more questions?
Hi, thank you so much for all of the knowledge and information you've shared so far. I just wanted to let everyone know, feel free to address a question to a particular member of the panel. You can ask general questions, but you can also ask specific questions. So I guess leading into that, I have a specific question for you, Vijay. So I guess in terms of Colin Biggers Paisley offers a graduate program rather than a clerkship program. I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about how that program is particularly unique. We have a lot of final year students in the room tonight who would love to hear about it.
Thank you. I actually did research yesterday, so good question. So we try to avoid clerkships. We don't feel that a clerkship gives a firm enough time to assess whether or not it's worth having the particular candidate stay around long enough to offer them a full-time job. So what we try to do is we have the graduate program. I think it's opening, applications are opening next Monday. So there's opens next Monday. The first round of interviews, I believe, is a video interview. So I'm just looking at my HR manager here who's nodding to make sure I'm getting everything correct. The next round of interviews is with HR. And then the next round of interviews after that is with the graduate program, which are partners and some senior lawyers from around the firm, which are hand selected. Those who think they've got a good eye for talent, they'll probably tell you they do, they probably don't. And the last round of it, our graduate program is very important to us because what we believe is that you get the best talent by taking them early. Having them grow with your law firm, and then they have that affinity with your law firm. They have that cultural fit with your law firm, and they just love being part of your law firm. So that's where we go to get our best talent. So the last part of our process is having our managing partner interview each individual candidate. And like I said, what we try to do is, I think we don't intake a great amount of graduates. What we try to do is make sure that the intake that we do have is just enough so that at the end of the 12-month program, there's an opportunity for each of those graduates to be offered full-time employment. And after that, we think that after a year, we've got an opportunity to assess. Normally what happens is in the first rotation, everybody will love their graduate, then everybody will love the next graduate, then everybody will love the next graduate after that. So you think you're going to try and make an offer of employment to the first graduate, but then you're confused at the end of it because you don't know who you want. And then all of a sudden everyone's fighting over these 5 or 6 graduates that have come into the firm. So that'll be quite fun for everybody. Yeah, so that's a big part of what we're about. And all I can say is throw your hat in the ring, make your CV as well-rounded as possible, put in all the extracurricular activities you've done, put in all the committees that you've been on, put in all the volunteering work that you've done. Just prove that you're more than just a law student who reads books, because that to me is probably the one thing which will count against you.
Awesome. Anyone else?
We've talked about the traditional ways of getting into law and non-traditional ways, so through government jobs. And my question is, how do you become more employable in a profession that seems to be evolving at a pace faster than the actual degree that we study? So there's quite a bit of consensus that, you know, traditional law and business law and justice law by itself, you know, artificial intelligence and law hasn't really been introduced to the degrees, and that's such a big thing coming into the profession through contracts. So, I mean, I'm not asking you how do we become more employable, but how do we get around that in a degree that's kind of a bit stumped, if I can say that?
My experience, and the lecturers are probably going to hate this, but you learn nearly everything that you use in your job after you leave uni. But what uni does is it teaches you the way to think, and it gives you the analytical tools to be able to step into a law firm and be able to fix the problems that you've been presented with on a daily basis. So I wouldn't worry too much about all the technology and whatnot. The most important thing is working hard now, because at the end of the day, all the tools that you're going to use as a lawyer, you will learn once you step foot in the door.
What he said. Plus, the perception of the rate of change is far greater than the actual rate of change. Law is a ponderously slow juggernaut that doesn't move very quickly at all, which is why the law degrees you're currently studying closely resemble the law degrees from 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago in terms of their content and approach. It is not a fast-moving industry. It may seem to be more fast-moving at the moment, but that's mostly the news cycle and not as reflective of reality as you might think.
Yeah, agreed. I'll tell you a secret. For our grads and for our clerks that come into our business, we're not particularly worried about the content that you learn at uni. So absolutely support what Vijay said. Most of what you'll learn will come afterwards. We just want to see that you can focus, that you can study, that you can hold an intelligent conversation, and that you can do stuff outside of your degree.
Thank you. Seeing as how we're all telling secrets here tonight, working in industrial relations in the employment law sort of sector, my secret is that I never actually did employment law as a elective at university. And as Vijay has pointed out, leaps and bounds, you know, I've come forward leaps and bounds since finishing my degree last year. You know, you learn so much right from the, you know, how to address your colleagues, to presenting in a courtroom or a commission, you know, researching. It rains and pours as soon as you're in the profession. I think, as Vijay pointed out, the degree isn't necessarily, well, it is to teach law, but it's to teach you a way to think. And you know, law is a changing environment, as you've pointed out. I tend to think it does move fairly slowly, as opposed to some other industries. But if you are able to switch on to the way that lawyers think and use that to the best of your ability, then no matter what sort of law that you're practicing in, be it you know, contract, insurance, litigation, you'll do well. So focus more on the way that you can communicate, and particularly focus on your emotional intelligence. I've found that I've been listening to a fair few podcasts and doing a fair amount of reading on emotional intelligence, and I've found that in a corporate setting, being able to communicate and recognize other people's emotions in a professional sense will also help develop you as a professional, and be able to adapt to any sort of environment that you might find yourself in.
As the academic and the lecturer, I'm just trying to work out exactly how I should react to what Vijay said. And I think ultimately I'm ambivalent about what he said. I agree with him entirely, that what you learn during the course of your degree in terms of the substantive content of the law, much of it will be dead letter by the time you become lawyers. Much of it you will never again consider. I mean, you may go down a path and never think about contract law again in all of your life, if you're lucky. But on the other hand, what you do learn out of that substantive content is a general picture of how the law functions and how it operates. So to give you an example, I was briefed in a matter last year, which was a criminal trial for aiding suicide. Now, if you've done criminal law, I would almost like to guarantee that there was no mention made of the offence of aiding suicide. So nothing I learned in my law degree about criminal law helped me on that score. I had to have a 40-minute argument, no, a 40-minute discussion with a Supreme Court judge as to what the elements of the offence were, because it's only ever been charged in Queensland twice. So all of that was stuff which I had to acquire, which was completely and utterly beyond what I'd ever learned in criminal law when I did my degree. But on the other hand, I was doing it in a context of an understanding of how the criminal justice system works and how the criminal law functions. So that all of the stuff about the rules of evidence and all of that was still being pulled in. It was being updated, but the basic fundamental shape and structure of the law hasn't changed since 1998 when I graduated. The details and the fuzzy bits around the edges are different, but the fundamental shape of the law hasn't changed. And the fundamental shape of the way the law functions, at least in its criminal jurisdiction, hasn't changed.
Oh, I have a question for all of you. Is it right that the majority of you are here because you put in applications for clerkships and for whatever reason after the rounds haven't got an offer? Is that, you can raise your hands or nod if that is correct. Is that largely utter stillness in the room? Why are you all here? I'm here for the pizza at the end. Who has considered what their plan is to get a job? Like who actually has a plan other than desiring a job? Does anyone? Would anyone like to share their plan and workshop it a little for the benefit of those around them? Is that something you guys would be happy to do? Because we've touched on a few awesome things, and Vijay's mentioned a few awesome things, and I call one of the things he mentioned clone syndrome, which is every CV from law students fundamentally looks the same these days, and it's why the easiest way to restrict the number of CVs you have to read is through GPA, but it's also horrifying that that's the only way people can do. It's simpler than trying to get to the humanity of every single person. So some of the things that have come up like that, I think would be worthwhile. So if anyone would like to grab the microphone off Lauren, who's chatting in the back, I thought that might be, would that be helpful for people to work through that with someone brave and vulnerable?
So I actually work with Brent. I was the one who dragged him along tonight. I'm sure I'll get a stern talking to later. So I've been a clerk at Thiess for just over a year now, and I found the in-house experience fantastic. I've never actually worked in a law firm in any capacity, but I've really enjoyed the in-house experience. So that's kind of set my preference looking forward into that more in-house role. It's still quite a niche role. Like, you know, there's far less jobs available in an in-house capacity as there is, for example, in a law firm. But some of the options I've been considering, for example, I know the ACCC and ASIC kind of have legal grad roles. Our parent company has a couple of spots, and I think there's a couple of similar programs with other mining companies. I think the big banks and the big four professional services are starting to get legal grad programs. So those are options I've been looking at. But kind of taking on people like Brent and everyone here tonight's advice, I'm trying not to completely shut off all other options. I've been getting a lot of advice from professionals to keep my options open and still look at the traditional path of a law firm, you know, if for nothing else, just to see what it's like and confirm that I would prefer to go into something else. So that's my plan.
That's not a plan yet. So, a plan, big picture plan is find a job. Obviously, that's the aspiration. In terms of narrowing down the scope a little, rather accepting what we've all said about opportunity, of course, and not putting the blinkers on too much, can you narrow it down at all to a kind of vibe, like a practice area? Are you interested in construction? Have you reached out to people? Is it CIMIC? Have you reached out to people in the head company? Have you done things like that already, or are you just sort of looking at what should I then do next?
Well, I don't graduate for another couple of years, so probably still a little bit early for me.
That's the best time to be thinking about it.
Yeah, apparently. Yeah, I mean, look, I've really enjoyed working in the mine, or Thiess is mining actually, and kind of the CIMIC is mostly construction, but we're kind of the mining company. I've really enjoyed it. I have, you know, reasonable knowledge of it now, so it's definitely something I'll consider. I think some kind of in-house corporate counsel in resources would probably be the most concrete my career aspirations get.
In terms of like the graduate programs and stuff, yes, they exist, but in my experiences and the roles that I have worked in, I've, you know, acquired a bit of a talent for calling through to the front desk, and you keep trying until you find the right person to talk to, and then you get their email address, and then you can pursue that way. I feel like if you wait for the gates to open, then they've already got this tunnel vision. But if you come to them before they open the gates, then they may see you prior. So call again, get email addresses, add them on LinkedIn.
Definitely. I think that the hardest thing for, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I'm Julia and I dragged BJ along.
I like how everyone has someone who dragged them. I just came on the bus.
Yeah, but we're going to be home in a minute, okay? Just shush. Adam, please, Adam, John, we're going to be home in a minute.
That was unexpected.
So I'm in the HR team. So just on what you were saying before about hounding us, you were one of them who rings and emails and it never stops. We get it all the time. But honestly, when an opportunity comes up, and we think about, oh, we might need an extra hand in our office services group or in an administrative role or as a paralegal, we go, right, and literally just go, who, okay, right, that he hounded me all the time. We'll get on to blah.
Maybe he'll finally shut up.
So, and it's something that we do, if you stand out, we will remember you.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that is really important for people to remember.
And that's kind of the key, which is what everyone's looking to doing in one form or another. And Vijay touched on it with your experience and your well-rounded CVs or your personality or your culture fit, which is how the heck do you actually stand out to the people you want to stand out to, but not in a way like that person who auditioned for Idol whose parents never told them they couldn't sing. So you want to be... You want to be in some way conspicuous, don't you, to the people, whether it's because you got in front of them, like you literally just planted yourself in front of them on the phone or on LinkedIn or whatever, or because you've done something or experienced something. And often it's a bit of both. So, I mean, for you, you have this huge catapult at your disposal because you're already working and have been working with a bunch of people inside that industry. And that's a no-brainer to capitalize on in some way. Whether you continue working there over the next couple of years before you graduate or not, I think a couple of people on the panel already said to keep in touch with the people you are presently in touch with. The easiest way to do that without going crazy is obviously going to be some form of social media, but it's not the be all and end all. Construction in particular, or mining in particular, have any number of industry associations you can join, but you can participate. Getting in front of people and being distinguishable and being noticeable is largely about knowing people and participating with them. If you've met someone once, that's better than having met them 0 times. If you've met them a bunch of times, that's better than having met them once. If you've shaken their hand and had a conversation about something, you have a common interest. I recall a few years ago, James Duffy, that most of you probably know, shared that he got one of his early jobs because they had a common interest in cricket. And that was an associateship with a judge. So, you know, don't underestimate the human connection with people, and you can only make human connections if you're in front of people and participating with them. So for you, and I'll let other people speak in a minute who have more opinions than me, but for you, the obvious plan is going to be to just turn up in the industry that you're in, continue the relationships with the people you already have relationships with, because that will only ever do you well in some form or another. Whether or not there's a job going in any of these, if you know people well enough and they trust you and they like you, then you have a far greater opportunity of standing out in the huge numbers of applicants for every job.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that can help you to stand out is to do some research about where it is you want to be, so that you can tailor yourself. And I don't mean falsely, but actually pick up on those things in your life or whatever, which can be used to get a little bit of leverage, to get a foot in the door. The best example I can remember of that is that one of my students, who's a late onset lawyer like me, he didn't want to become a solicitor. He wanted to go straight to the bar when you used to be able to do that. And he was talking to me one day and he said, is there any way you can circumvent being a solicitor? I said, well, the best way you can do it is to become a judge's associate, because the benefits of an associateship are incredible. You get to see good and bad advocacy. You get to see how judges respond to good and bad advocacy when they go out the back, as opposed to what they say when they're in the courtroom. And so, well, how do I pick my judge? I said, well, and I knew what he did for a living. He flew Black Hawks. He'd done 3 tours of Afghanistan. And so he had a long history in the military. I said, well, the easiest thing is to just find the judges who have RFD, the judges who have served in the military and who are in the reserve forces. He only applied to judges with RFD, and he actually got the first one he applied for, who they probably had a great old chat about flying Black Hawks and shooting people. I have no idea how it actually happened, but they just manufactured, if you like, that direct and obvious connection, a bit like James Duffy and cricket. A bit more dramatic.
Shooting people.
Shooting people is much more dramatic than playing cricket.
I'll just finish off the advice to Raf. I give Raf advice all the time, but you're very lucky because you're in the industry now that you want to be in. What I would be doing if I was you is annoying every Thiess lawyer. You can annoy them now that are no longer in that team. To go to meetings with, our clients and other people that we deal with. But the other thing is you need to consider, the legal field as very collegiate. Okay, so when we're on the opposite side of the table and we're doing transactions, with other lawyers, and even if it's disputes or litigation matters or anything like that, you treat people respectfully. We're all part of the same industry, I guess. We're all part of the same field. Because matters come and go, when that's finished and over, connect with them on LinkedIn, or I've gone and had beers with lawyers that we've had big fights with and all of that sort of thing, because they will become champions of you in the future. So you've got a period now where you can really develop those relationships, connect with people on both sides, and look at it as, it's a profession, and people in the profession are going to help you if you treat them in the right way.
Excellent. Well, we might go back to the floor. I think there are a few more questions that we're waiting. We've got one at the front on the left.
I'll go here first and then. Sorry, guys. I have a question. I didn't apply for a clerkship last year because I actually had a baby in my penultimate year. But I've kept up full-time study instead of going hell for leather and trying to get clerkship. So I guess my question is, I have a lot of interests. I've done some experience in criminal advocacy, and then I have some friends that are in commercial firms as well who I think, oh, that's like litigation and insurance, that seems really fun. And the biggest question that I get asked all the time, I don't know if everyone else is in the same boat, is where do you see yourself? What area you're interested in? And my honest answer is I'm actually interested in a bunch of areas and would be interested in pursuing any of those if I got the opportunity. How do I answer that question without looking absolutely flaky? Like, I'm interested in lots of things. Thanks for asking.
I'll start. We have a guy that I work with at Thiess has a saying, which is whatever interests his boss fascinates him. All right, so it depends on who's asking the question. So if you're applying, if you're over at Thiess and you're applying for a graduate role, and I say to you, you know, what are you interested in? I'm really interested in mining. I love resources. You know, I follow the Adani story. I'm sort of all over this, all over that. So it depends on who's asking. If you're applying for something a little bit more general and, you know, someone's trying to, you can sense that they're trying to work out, are you more well-rounded? Are you interested in other things? Or are you just somebody who sits in a corner and reads books? Then you will talk a bit more about those interests. So it's all about getting that foot in the door. Tailor your answer to suit. Don't lie, you know, but have a think about who is asking the question and what sort of answer they're looking for. I don't know if that's good advice or not, but that's basically what I do.
That's kind of bang on the mark, because when you mentioned insurance law, I got a little bit excited because nobody mentions insurance law. I didn't even know insurance law existed until I got my job. So I was researching insurance. Yeah, I was researching insurance law the day of my interview to try and figure out what it was. Still haven't figured it out. Anyway, but it's, yeah, try to get an idea of who you're being interviewed by, and then, yeah, tickle them nicely. Find out if there's anything online about the interests. They're going to love talking to you about that. That generally works.
I'll probably go the opposite and say I don't eat coal for breakfast. I would probably go along the more of like the touchy, feely sort of response, depending on who I'm in front of. For me, my answer would be that I enjoy advocacy, and advocacy comes in many different roles within our profession, and I enjoy seeing outcomes from my work, and seeing outcomes, you know, throughout the legal process as such. Doesn't matter. I don't think for me it would matter what area of law I was working in. You know, at the moment it's industrial relations and employment. You know, if it was to be civil litigation in 3 years' time, then I feel as though I would still have that same viewpoint that I enjoy outcomes, and I enjoy the process. So I don't necessarily enjoy a particular area. I just enjoy the process.
I guess there's kind of two issues wrapped up in one there, isn't there? Which is, I'll put my head up here. Hello. There's two issues wrapped up in one, which is, should you in fact look at jobs that are very restricted in their scope? And the second is, how do you answer when you go to the interview? Like others, I think I went to an interview before I got my first job with Blake Dawson Waldron, as it then was. And it was a town planning job. And I had no idea what town planning, and even attempting to research it that long ago was more challenging than what it might be now. And they asked me almost that exact question you're talking about. I'm like, I have no clue. I didn't say that. I really fluffed my way through. They liked me because I did well in statistics, of all things, at university. I didn't get that job, shockingly enough. But there's two questions, because let's bear in mind now the sheer scope of the legal landscape. So in terms of the formal clerkship application process, a pitifully few number of firms participate in it compared to the number of firms that actually exist just in Queensland, let alone across Australia. And they have a tendency to be very large firms, and they have a tendency to be firms that operate in a very work group-ish way. Not across the board, you know, all firms are a little bit different in the way they organise themselves. But so when you do go to those firms, notwithstanding the rotation you might get at some, to gauge your interest level and talent levels in certain areas, you will ultimately end up usually practicing in a particular area, whether that be property or construction or even a subset beyond those, or intellectual property or litigation or whatever. Don't discount the fact that there are still an absolute ton of small firms who will basically, within a margin of not getting sued, take on whatever work will walk through the door. There is still a space for a generalist practice, and there are still many generalist practices throughout Queensland. I started work at a smaller firm. It had a tendency to lend itself towards being, I guess, litigation, but it did conveyancing, it did property transactions. I helped someone buy and set up their licensing in a restaurant. That was painful to do the first time, I can tell you. But there are a lot of firms who do just general work. They help people in whatever area they can, and as long as they don't feel themselves to be utterly incompetent with it, in which case they will share it with someone else or get a farm out to a solicitor who's open to that sort of thing or whatever, that is still a perfectly viable practice area. And that might also help you, bearing in mind all the things we've already said, figure out what you actually enjoy, the practice of, because you may find that you enjoy something a lot more than the others, and that you know, streamlines ahead, and then you can specialize if you choose to in that, or you can keep doing whatever just to help people.
I guess I'm mildly concerned about whatever interests the boss fascinates me. I have this tendency to think that throughout the whole of the application interview process, there is only one person you can sell, and that's the person who you are. Having sat on enough selection panels across a range of industries and a range of sort of professions and occupations, I can tell you now that within 5 seconds, if you try to present yourself as being fascinated in something and you're not, and you don't have a degree of street cred, you just make the note because you can see it a mile off. So
that was my town planning interview, by the way.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
So,
Yeah, they're sitting on the other side. He doesn't know crap about it.
It was they gave up
Yeah.
on me pretty early.
And it really does come back to that. I mean, if you manage, I mean, the only way you can do that is if your second degree is in theatre and acting, and you may well be able to get away with it. The only problem is that what you'll have done is sold something which you're not, and you'll then have to keep acting and you'll have to keep pretending in order to stay there. And what you'll create for yourself is a life of utter misery.
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, no, I definitely said don't lie. And I guess what I meant by that is sometimes we have people come in and say, okay, I would like to be a clerk at Thiess. I've applied for a clerkship. And one of the questions we'll ask them is, okay, what do you know about Thiess? And you're right, the people who don't know anything and haven't done their research and try to sort of make it up very quickly see through that. The people who have actually done some research and looked into it and said, right, well, I've read this news article and I've seen this about your company and this is what I understand. That's what we're looking for, is someone who's showing an interest. So certainly don't come in and make it up or try to be something that you're not, but do a little bit of research into it and try and think about the questions that you're going to get asked and who's asking those questions, what they're going to be interested in. We don't expect people to come in and talk like they've been a mining engineer for the last 20 years, unless they have been, but they need to show a little bit of interest and have done a little bit of sort of digging into what they're getting into. That's a mining joke, by the way.
Just on that, it's impossible to over prepare for an interview. Even if you don't get your first job, it's like a first date. The more you date, the better you get at it. So you want to try and use the experience of going to a job interview as an experience to learn how to get better at your next job interview. But try to put together a list of any answer you think, or any question you think can be asked, and have an answer for it. And like there could be. I think when I was at uni, there was a list of about 50 questions floating about, and I prepared answers to every single one, and I learned the answers to every single one, and it helped me immensely. And I still do that for job interviews. I'm not looking at the moment, by the way. I still do that for job interviews till this day, and it just helps with your confidence going into an interview, knowing that you're basically ready for anything, and you're showing that level of confidence, and you can portray and sell the person that you really are, rather than having to fumble and think up answers on the spot.
Great. We might have time for one or two more questions.
We actually have a question from our live chat that we've got going at the moment. So we have a question from Joe in the chat, and the question is directed to Brent. The question is, would you say that cultural experience is regarded higher or lower than actual grades when employing and assessing CVs? And Joe has explained that traveling is a big part of their life, but sometimes it results in grades slipping a bit. Should Joe be prioritizing one over the other?
It's a difficult question. Your grades help you get in the door. Okay, so they're not the be all and end all, but it's certainly something that we look at. Fours open doors, but fives and sixes are much better. So yeah, look, this answer is going to be different for different companies and for different people. For Thiess, we do take the cultural experience and the fact that people are well-rounded and have done things in their life quite seriously, and it adds a lot to an applicant that has done that. So you can even you look at our lawyers. We've got, obviously I used to lock people up for a living. The lawyer next to me used to be a geologist. The lady next to him used to, she started as a judge's associate. We've had people come through, all sorts of different streams to end up in that legal team. You do need the grades to get the foot in the door, so you've got to be careful not to let those slip. But once you've done that, the people who have not just travelled, but also, been involved in their community and volunteered and been part of, societies at uni and all of those sort of things is going to hold you in good stead.
I actually don't put my GPA on my resume. I feel as though that's probably a question an employer can ask me if they so desire. For me, I feel as though if you can prove on your resume that you are willing and able to give it a go. So for me, I was working full-time for the entire 3.5 years of my law degree and completing my law degree full-time, as well as, participating in various other volunteering roles with YMCA Brisbane and a couple of other different things. For me personally, I think that that's much more desirable for a prospective employer than a number between 1 and 7. So I don't actually put mine on, and I've never actually been asked it either. And I'm happy to tell you that it never peaked past a 5.3. So.
Any other questions? We have one at the front who's been waiting quite a while.
So although this question is aimed at all of the panelists, I recognise that some of you may have more exposure to this than others, and that's fine. But what advice do you have for multidisciplinary students or law students interested in pursuing careers that may not be traditional to the industry of law, because the jobs are either still emerging or they're innovative or disruptive?
Can you be more specific?
So I'm doing a double degree in law and IT, and my particular focus and my direction that I want to go in is not just enabling law with IT, but innovating the way that law is practiced using methods of IT that may exist currently, but most likely don't exist at the moment. So what is your advice for those niche jobs? Getting your foot in the door is one thing for existing jobs, but creating those jobs for yourself.
Do you want a job at all? Or do you want to go into business and run an entrepreneurial sort of streak?
Business has a very, entrepreneurial base, sure, but I would like to have a a good understanding of law, obviously. That's why I'm doing the degree. But my interest is, like I said, not just applying law to IT and going, oh, this is cyber law and I understand it, but perhaps revolutionizing or finding new ways of using IT to represent the way we do law currently.
I'm interested because I, of course, run a digital marketing business, which is mildly nerdy. Mildly. You'd know if you're on LinkedIn. I think it's very difficult to utilize IT to innovate the practice of law if you don't have a good amount of experience in the practice of law to identify for you those opportunities where you can use your other skill set to offer that innovation, whether it's in the context of a firm or a place where you are working, because certainly most law firms require or would benefit from some kind of assistance. It will be easy for you to get pigeonholed as a lawyer only. You know, larger firms have IT divisions to do IT-ish stuff, and they're directed what to do from on high. And innovation is one of those interesting words, but it can be challenging at some places to introduce as a lawyer something that's innovative in a different skill set that nobody necessarily appreciates you have. Personally, I would think the best way you can identify opportunities to use both skill sets, if you're particularly interested in using IT in a legal context, is to develop and build your greater appreciation of that legal context. In terms of pure what you would do with it and how would it help people the most, that probably means going towards a law firm direction is my gut reaction, because that's where the most consumers of legal innovation are going to be. But that doesn't mean that's where you have to go. It's just where you might be able to identify those opportunities. Does that sort of give you an opinion, at least? I'm not going to call that an answer. It's an opinion.
This is probably a bit of an airy-fairy answer, but all these ideas have just come into my head as Chris was speaking. Now, I can't remember who I had the conversation with as a recent, but the person said a law degree is the new arts degree. And
way more expensive.
Yeah. And for a split second, that really angered me. And I sort of thought, well, actually, no. And then I thought about it a little bit more, and I come to terms with what that person was really trying to say is that law teaches you a way to think. And that way of thinking can be used in a plethora of different fields. And I don't think you should particularly constrain yourself to just law and I'll have to find somewhere that, I'll be able to use my IT. And I remember I applied for a position at Unilever in my last year of uni. I made it through the second round of interviews, wasn't successful after that, but those sort of positions that you don't really think about, big organizations and like national corporates, they have these graduate programs that aren't necessarily focused on your law degree, but more so you as a professional and how you tend to think in the business world, if that makes sense.
My advice is get into a law firm and become a subject matter expert in that particular area. I heard a story a couple last week. The preeminent cryptocurrency lawyer in the world started dabbling in the legal side of cryptocurrency. before anyone else knew what cryptocurrency was and how blockchain worked and how it was interesting. He's now got a global firm. I think he lives in San Francisco, lives in the States. He's got offices in Canada and the US, and he's the #1 cryptocurrency lawyer in the world because he took an interest in something which nobody really had an interest in. He became the subject matter expert on it and became the #1 go-to guy. So yes, you probably need something else to complement that, but become an expert at it, write articles on it, be known as the guy to go to for that particular issue. So just throw all your eggs into one basket, but do something as well, like corporate law, unfortunately.
Yeah, just the last thing I'll add to that, double degrees are great. Law and IT, fantastic combination. You should come and have a chat to me after this.
Hi, kind of on this very similar track. I enjoy like academia and writing and research. This question might be more directed to you, Mark. Are there any, because like the general consensus I've gotten is that the more bookish people who sit in the corner and read books might not get those roles that they want. But are there actually roles for people who like enjoy the research side of law and the innovative side of law?
Absolutely. Although I guess you probably have to recognise that. I mean, if you look at the sort of the comparable relative labour markets where you're looking about 10,000 solicitors, for example, in Queensland, I don't know the numbers of academics, but I'll guarantee it's nowhere near that. So you're actually looking into a fairly narrow field. You're also looking into a field which is certainly over the time I've been watching it and been in it has become increasingly competitive. I'm pretty certain I wouldn't get a job there now. I lucked out and got a job when I did get a job, simply because you're now finding that it's becoming more an international labour market. And so trying to get a job at an Australian university, you may find yourself competing with people who have PhDs from wherever, from the United States and Oxford. And in certain areas, it doesn't matter that they're extra-jurisdictional. The fact that their skill or experience is not in Australian law is really of not much significance.
Sorry. Can I just ask, so are you looking at an academic career path, or is your question, is there a role for an academic practitioner? A bit of both, depending on what the answers are and the opportunities are. That's fair enough. I think Mark's hopefully well answered the first component. I guess my thought on the second component is similar to Vijay's comment before about IT, which is to ideally, if you want to go into practice, find an area where you can become supremely expert and known as being supremely expert. I'm not going to pretend that that's going to be easy, because the truth is, as we've all sort of said, and as you've clearly picked up on, even amongst a sea of individuals, many of whom would call themselves introverted in various different ways, which is kind of where lawyers find themselves often, law is still a very human and personal and interactive practice, and it can be difficult. But that is not to say that someone who is not a particular expert in a particular field can't have a very successful private practice career path. There might just be a few growing pains at the start, to be frank, because it's going to be difficult to say I'm the world's greatest expert in X, and by the way, I've been admitted for 4 months and 7 days, because people will have a clash of how they perceive that.
My question is, so once you do get your foot in the door, say it's an area that you do like, but you're also kind of considering a different area of law, what's the best option? Do you stick to what you're working in at the moment and get a decent amount of experience, or do you kind of look at other options as well and risk losing what you have?
That's going to be a challenging decision. And I have seen senior lawyers change work area and for all intents and purposes become more junior lawyers now because of their lack of expertise in those areas. They still, of course, had a decade of experience in their earlier area. So they have a decade of dealing with clients, and they have a decade of dealing with nonsense amounts of administration, and they have a decade of dealing with people. And so they bring those skills to that new area, but what they don't bring is, I guess, the expertise in the area itself. It's really going to be a very personal decision depending on your circumstances. The longer you stay in an area, two things will happen at a very pragmatic level. You will get further and further pigeonholed in that area in the perception people have of you, and you will earn more money in that area and find it much, much harder to make the decision to leave because of the hit that will probably happen unless you have an incredibly forgiving firm if you change to an area that you have precious little experience in. These days, there are probably opportunities to more gently dovetail yourself into a new area. I've seen people move from, say, property, pure property, into what's called hospitality, which you may or may not appreciate is essentially a liquor and gaming practice. So they gradually progressed from a property practice into a hospitality practice. And that was a fairly smooth transition, and they didn't suffer too badly as a consequence. So that's a possibility if you can sort of straddle both. Some firms will allow you to do that. Some practices will have that kind of flexibility and others won't. So it's really going to be what opportunities are there in the place where you find yourself, I think. But I wouldn't personally leave it too long before trying to explore that opportunity, because I think it gets harder over time.
Only finishing my degree 6 months ago, I don't think I can totally answer your question. But for me, I don't see myself in this area for my entire life. I don't tend to plan that far ahead. Look, I do think it's important professionally to make sure that you don't end up like Chris has just explained and pigeonholed right at the top. I've always sort of thought about a professional experience as really after about 10, 15 years, you sort of start to actually depreciate in what you know, and learning new things is probably going to be a bit more beneficial to you and your career as a whole.
If you've got the opportunity within a firm to test that other area of law, it's you just go and knock on the door of the partner and say, hey, I'm doing this, but I'm interested in what you're doing as well. And you get an opportunity to work with that particular partner. What I will say is that if you do like the area of law you're working in and you do like your boss, the most important thing that you realize as you get older is you will choose a job based on the person you're working for rather than the actual work that you're doing. I've worked with some horrible people and they make life pretty traumatic. So when you do find a boss that nurtures you, cares for you, treats you like your your interests at heart, stick with it, because law is full of kids. So if you find one that's not a kid, stick with it.
Yeah, I support that. And look, the comment from Chris that it's a personal decision is absolutely accurate, because when those situations come up, there's a number of different things you have to take into account. But one thing I'll say from my own personal experience is I've made decisions a couple of times to move into something that I thought I would enjoy more or was more aligned with, what I wanted to do at the time. And I've, had a pay cut as a result. I've tried never to let money sort of affect my decision, because if you enjoy something and you get good at it and you get more experience in it, the money will come back. So it's difficult and it's a personal thing, but I would really suggest try hard not to let money influence. The biggest issue with that in our industry is people who work FIFO. So particularly in Western Australia, and they, spend a lot of time away from their families, and they go work on sites for weeks at a time and get used to the money and find it very hard to say no to that when other things start happening. And it's something that we're working on because it's quite sad and difficult. But for yourself personally, if you're looking to change something because you think that's what you want to do, don't let money be the guiding factor.
Not a financial advisor. Please consider your own personal circumstances. But in terms of career opportunities, and we've all spoken about the opportunities we've had and the ones we've taken and the weird and wonderful directions all our various paths have taken us. What I see sometimes is young lawyers around the 3 to 5 year mark who have, through a series of financial decisions, tethered themselves to a path that they cannot escape from by exploring the kinds of opportunities we've spoken about and touched upon. And often those tethers are financial ones, because as you progress in the progression and in the career and you get paid more money, and then you will get a credit card with a stupid amount of credit on it, and then you will take on a mortgage, and all these things start to layer up, and I'm not even starting to touch on family obligations. So just be conscious in what everyone here has said, which is you don't always know when you've landed and when opportunities will present themselves. Just be conscious of those things, those decisions you're making, which have very long-term effects, which might shut down those opportunities which would otherwise be attractive. P.S. Not financial advice.
We actually have a question based on a few chat questions. So the question is, some recruiters and HR persons have indicated that time off for family, sports or travel indicate a lack of dedication to a Brisbane career. How do we avoid that perception?
Working for a union, I would strongly object. Yeah, exactly. No, we're not allowed that in our profession. I would strongly object to that. I'm not sure if the HR lady in the room would agree. But working with employees every day who are on flexible working arrangements, etc. Mothers returning from maternity leave in a staggered phase. I think that they're some of the most productive employees that you'll ever find, to be truthful, as opposed to the young graduate that rocks up at 7 and leaves at 8 p.m. every day. Outside of 9 a.m. and 4 p.m., I don't believe that any meaningful work is ever really conducted. So yeah, no, I would strongly disagree. And if your employer is saying that to you, then pack your bags and find somewhere that respects you.
I'm an early riser, so I disagree completely with the 9 a.m. nonsense. But that's a very difficult. It's not that difficult. It's hard and it's not hard, and it's one of those fascinating things because all firms are different and all people are different. Some people flourish best in an environment where they can turn up to work every day, work hard, and they get a sense of satisfaction out of that. Others find their fulfillment and life joy in traveling the world. I'm not a traveler. I have never really enjoyed travel that much. My aspirations have never included visiting all the natural wonders of the world or whatever. I might like to, but that's not ever driven me. I think it's dependent upon what your expectations are of the firm. If you want to work 2 weeks on and then take a 4-week holiday and then work 2 weeks on and take a 4-week holiday, it's very hard for you to actually provide value to that firm in a consistent and meaningful way. And I say this in the context of someone, I work flexible hours. So I am a casual employee. I work flexibly with a firm who has been good about that. And I respect them as a consequence, and I work hard for them when called upon to do so. So I think at the risk of dispelling too much fairy dust, at the end of the day, you need to work hard as a lawyer, and you need to have rational expectations, especially if you're working in private practice, of what that practice will permit you to do. And with that in mind, some firms are fine for you to take 4 weeks unpaid leave to take a special holiday or whatever. But if you want to do it 4 times a year, it becomes very disruptive to your group and to all the other people who need to pick up all the work that you need to hand over to them while you're on your holidays. So there is a little bit of give and take that needs to be involved in those sorts of decisions as well. That as long as you're doing it respectfully and the firm values your contribution, there often won't be a huge impediment to that happening in firms with rational people who don't fall into the category Vijay mentioned before.
Can we ask a question from the video? What if it's actually getting your CV into the firm? So it's a HR perception that that's overseas experience, for example, isn't valued because you can't commit to Brisbane. So you can't get your CV past that HR blockage. How do you deal with that to get it seen by a lawyer, perhaps?
Should I pass the microphone to the HR person that's here?
So prior to Colin Biggers and Paisley, I worked for DLA Piper, so we're an international firm. So we had no issues with people wanting to work anywhere in the world, because if we had good people, we could place them anywhere in the world where they wanted to work. So if working internationally and working overseas is something that is important to you, it is worthwhile looking at some of those big international firms. We at CBP though, we've got an alliance with ADVOC, who are an international alliance where we can look at potential secondments and stuff overseas. I mean, we have people who a perfect example is Vijay's first grad. She was born in Malaysia. She lived in the US. She did an internship at Google, and she can speak 7 languages. What she's doing in Brisbane, we don't know. But we took her on, and she, you know, she loves it in Brisbane. She probably will go overseas. She probably will go and work somewhere else. But for us, it's about giving her that opportunity to come and work for us, to get some really good experience, to also set her up for, you know, what she wants next. So yeah, did they say HR roadblock or something? There's no roadblock. It's we look at all of the candidates equally and look at what's best for, you know, for our business and our program. Does that?
I think another part of the question was about explaining gaps in your resume as well. So if you've travelled overseas, or if you've had kids, or if you've done things like that.
Like career break, traveling, like don't leave it blank. Like don't have 5 years of nothing, because we'll think, what has this person been doing? Like traveling, list the 50 countries you've been to, like list it out. And even just on the, before I was going to mention about the GPA piece. There could be a valid reason why your GPA is not as high as what you'd like it to be. Explain that to us. So say, you know, in your first year, you had the significant trauma in your life, you got sick, whatever it is, explain it. Like we take that into consideration as well. The amount of people that have had something go wrong in the 4 or 5 years you're at uni, it's happened to all of you. You just need to explain it.
Yeah, I agree. Don't leave gaps. Put an explanation. Yeah. In terms of, you know, young mums having kids and all of that kind of thing, that's, you know, 30, 40, 50 years ago or whatever. It's our general counsel has 4 kids, works flexible hours, and she gets shit done. I can tell you that. So, you know, mums can't muck around. They've got kids to pick up and stuff like that. So they're, you know, extremely effective. But just explain it on the CV and it won't be a block.
Yeah, and just on that point, if you have been floating about, what employers like to think that you will work at that firm and you'll commit to that firm for your lifetime, even though we know that's garbage. But just show that you have a commitment to wanting to stay there for a little bit of time. just give the employer the belief that you are committed if you do start working there. So in my one of the experiences that I had was I was moving from Sydney to Brisbane. I still live in Sydney and I work in Brisbane, and my wife lives in Sydney, so I travel backwards and forwards. I'm essentially FIFO. But one of the things that my current employer was concerned about was that I wasn't going to commit to the firm. So I had to show a level of commitment to the firm. And once I showed the level of commitment, they built the trust in me. But it's just about portraying that message that you're willing to invest in the business so they can invest in you.
Well, if that's all for questions, we might wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for coming along to the event tonight. Before we do finish up though, I would just like to quickly thank all of our guest panelists tonight. You've all generously donated your time to answer some questions tonight. We all really appreciate it. And as a token of our appreciation, I believe we have some gifts. Before we do go on to pizza though, I would just like to just do a shameless plug of some more education events that are happening with the QUT Law Society. And those are a technology and artificial intelligence night, a criminal law information evening, a mining and resource law info evening, and also an advocacy evening. So just keep an eye out on the Facebook page, and we'll hopefully see you all there as well. So thanks all again so much for coming, and we've got pizza now, I think. I hope.
I might just chime in there, Kat. We've heard a lot tonight, everyone, about networking and getting involved and putting yourself out there. That's what the QUT Law Society does with all of our events. So whether that be education or doing a competition or anything like that, please come along. You know, you get to meet firms, you get to meet interesting people who have done all sorts of stuff with their life. You get to meet peers who are in the same boat, you know, wanting to go to the Botanic afterwards. So please come along. We have a grudge mood against UQ tomorrow night at the Banco Courts at 6 o'clock. That'll be lots of fun as well. And we've also got a lot of other sporting and health events coming up that you might want to sign up to as well, including things like dodgeball. So it's a lot of fun and it's a great thing to get involved with. We do have pizza now. It's outside. So just when you go out on the tables and chairs there are vegetarian and gluten-free options as well. So thank you everyone for coming.